War. It seemed to have followed Isabella everywhere she went. From a young age, her hometown was under constant attack from the Viking raiders as the Iron Legion stood by, doing nothing to drive them back. Her father, Richter, was a warden for the Iron Legion, and with every attack the Vikings led on his town he grew ever more frustrated, eventually leading to Richter joining the Blackstone Legion, who told promises of putting the Vikings down once and for all, and of taking the fight directly to them. Isabella at this time wasn't old enough to throw her life onto the field of battle despite her pleading to her father. She would, however, join the Blackstone Legion under her father's wing as a squire, and for years Isabella would train under her father, helping him maintain his equipment and morale, and in return she would learn how to use a longsword just as he had. However, all things weren't built to last. When word that the samurai and the Iron Legion were gathering to stage their final assault on the Blackstone Legion, and on Apollyon, Isabella was eager to assist her father in any way she could, only to be shut down repeatedly as Richter insisted that Isabella fled instead. They would enter a heated argument that would end with Richter trusting a lawbringer to take Isabella and run from the incoming battle. The lawbringer obliged. Clad in armor of orange and cloth of black, he flung Isabella over his shoulder and ran, taking her outside the fortress before returning inside, locking the door they had used behind him so Isabella couldn't follow him. As the screams and smoke rose from inside the fortress, Isabella's own would go unheard as she banged against the door, desperately crying out to her father. When night fell, a remnant of the Iron Legion managed to find her passed out beside the door and sobbing in her sleep. When she awoke, she found herself surrounded by the Iron Legion, who immediately began to interrogate her for answers as to why a teenager was at the battle at all. Isabella stayed silent, unsure of what saying the truth might bring her, of saying that she was part of the Blackstone Legion, helping her father in the battle beforehand. She'd rather not take her chances. Regardless, she would continue her training now under the Iron Legion as the war between the Vikings, samurai, and knights continued to rage on. And when she would come of age, she'd take the vows of a warden, and the ceremony would begin. The ceremony was a blur to her. She heard the vows and oaths that were spoken to her and repeated them mindlessly, but she did not listen, nor did she care for them truly. She was angry, grieving. She wanted blood. When the Wu Lin arrived, Heathmoor was all thrown out of balance, but Isabella simply saw another opponent to take to battle, and so she did. While her accomplishments on the battlefield alone earned her respect among the other members of the Iron Legion, she didn't care to engage with them. Whatever time allowed her to, she would visit the remains of the fortress that her father had died to protect, and she would grieve. It was unnatural how long she had been grieving, and she did not understand loss until her father's death, and now it was something she couldn't seem to go without feeling for even a day. Perhaps she felt guilty. Perhaps if she was by her father's side that day, they both would have made it out. Regardless, it was in the past, and now she had her own battles to fight, and her own vows to uphold. To forever honor her father's name, to forever uphold his duties, to forever uphold his battles. Those were Isabella's vows, regardless of whether or not the Iron Legion knew them. When the Truce of Wyverndale was signed and the festivities began, Isabella found herself worried and appalled. Without a war, she was without a job and without purpose. However, that wasn't her main concern, or the main cause of her disgust. It was the mock battles that were being held in the festival that she found insulting. Battles where her father had fought valiantly and with honor were treated with 0 ounce of respect and were mocked for a quick laugh? This is what peace brought? A mockery of those who demanded respect and the beliefs they've sacrificed themselves to uphold? She found an old conqueror of the Iron Legion on the edge of the festival telling stories to some children about the battle on Apollyon's fortress, and what she heard was the final straw that broke Isabella. And then there was this warden. Nothing special about him, he was simply sitting there crying, and when I approached he turned his head up to me and spoke. I, Richter... And then I slammed my flail directly onto the fool's head. This is war, old man. No one cares for your story. The story set Isabella alight in fury, however. It was her father that the conqueror spoke of, and he had cut him down before even granting him the dignity of his final words? Isabella stood up, and before she even realized what she was doing, the conqueror had laid dead at the end of her blade. The children ran and screamed, and in return several of the knights that were nearby drew their blade in response, and Isabella was quickly thrown into a cell, and preparations to have her executed immediately began. It was the dead of night when Isabella was leaning against the wet cell wall in an attempt to get some rest when she heard the clanking of metal against stone. As the sound got closer, she saw a figure. Clad in black armor and winged ornaments on both sides of her helmet, she spoke almost tauntingly at Isabella, but her words don't seem to convey her tone.
You slaughter sheep, and yet you end up locked away?
Come here to mock me before death, just as the entire festival has. Isabella spoke sharply, and anger still evidently present in her voice before the figure spoke once more.
Quite the opposite. My leader, Astria, has heard of what you've done today, and so she sent me to extend a helping hand. And who's this Astria you speak of?
Isabella was keeping her guard up, unable to understand the possible truth or intention behind the figure's words.
She's Apollyon's legacy. She's the leader of Horkos. And it is with her we are war.
As the figure finished her sentence, Isabella could hear screams and the clanging of metal from outside, interrupting the festivities as the figure once again spoke.
I'm Asmodeus. Now I ask you, will you join Horkos in the slaughter of those who dare bring peace?
Isabella paused, thinking about it for a long, long moment, before eventually nodding her head. Asmodeus broke the lock to her cell and motioned for Isabella to follow her, which she did. The rapid rise of power and sudden appearance of Horkos caught most of Heathmore off guard, and so they were able to rapidly establish power as the dominant faction within it. Meanwhile, Isabella traveled with a detachment of Horkos led by Asmodeus, and, to Isabella's surprise, she recognized many of the knights within the detachment as old members of the Blackstone Legion. Information that greatly pleased Isabella, as she indulged in sights of old friends and memories of her father, and of times when she was young. As time went on, Isabella began to train under Asmodeus herself, to eventually become a warmonger, a order of knights established by Astria to be the continuation of Apollyon's legacy. However, the final step into becoming a full-fledged warmonger is to kill a lawbringer and take his armor. Doing so would earn you your demon name, something that Isabella was explained to by Asmodeus. And so, Isabella was tasked with killing a lawbringer, a very specific lawbringer named Lewis Ryder. Asmodeus explained that Lewis had once served the Blackstone Legion, however has gone on to kill multiple of Horkos' soldiers, and has proven himself to be a traitor of Apollyon by extension, or so Asmodeus explained. So Isabella went out to find Lewis in a small village on the border of Ashfeld leading into Valkenheim. A month later, Isabella found herself approaching that village that Asmodeus had described to her. The village was poorly defended, only having a singular watchtower, so Isabella set up camp for the night and prepared herself to complete her mission the next day. When Isabella woke up, she stretched and donned her armor, before polishing her sword and walking into the town. A singular peacekeeper yelled from atop the watchtower to the town below. Before ever having to step into the town herself, out came a lawbringer, clad in orange armor and cloth of black. Armor that Isabella had recognized. A person Isabella had recognized. Stood before her none other was Lewis Ryder, the lawbringer that had forced her out of the fortress at the words of her father.
You, cultists of Horkos, what is your purpose here?
Lewis yelled out, his halberd to his side ready to strike at a moment's notice. Isabella shook her head. Despite knowing this man, she had already had her mind set on killing him.
I am here to kill you and claim my place as a warmonger.
Then you shall die as those sent before you had.
Lewis spoke, almost with a hint of regret, before the two engaged in battle. Isabella charged forth, slamming her shoulder into Lawbringer's armor, before swinging her blade. However, Lewis parries the incoming attack and counters with his own, forcing Isabella to step back. The fight would last unnaturally long, as Lewis forced Isabella at a distance with his halberd and shoving her away if she ever got close. In a fit of frustration, Isabella roared before bringing her sword down into a bind with Lewis's halberd. But before she could do anything with it, Lewis stepped back, causing Isabella to lose her footing before she hit the dirt beneath them. Lewis's hand would come up, grabbing her head, lifting her into the air before slamming her into the ground. Before Isabella could recollect herself, she felt the halberd pierce her leg. In a yell of pain, she grabbed her sword and, in a last effort to fend off her attacker, swung blindly in Lewis's direction, only for it to be effortlessly parried. The last thing Isabella saw was the halberd coming down upon her. Isabella was surprised to have awoken at all, having apparently only been knocked out by Lewis, who was now standing over her, tending to her wounds.
I don't suggest panicking, child.
Lewis spoke calmly, at least as calmly as his voice would allow him. He was no longer wearing his armor, revealing his bald head and gray beard. Isabella spoke up, unsure of what was going on or why it was going on.
You spared me. Why?
Isabella moved herself upright in great pain. Looking down, she saw her blonde hair cascading down her shoulders and realized she was no longer wearing her armor, and bandages were now surrounding her legs, where she had been pierced by Lewis's halberd.
Did you think I wouldn't recognize Richter's own daughter?
Lewis spoke calmly, at least compared to Isabel, lighting a candle and placing it on a nearby table.
You joined Horkos. I should have guessed it, Butch. Many of our old comrades had.
The words stood still in the air before Isabella broke the silence.
The festival was a mockery of my father's death. I joined Horkos to watch it burn.
Lewis let Isabella's anger set before speaking once more.
You'll be needing to heal for weeks. I messed up your leg pretty badly.
Lewis stood up and left Isabella on the loft so she could recover. As the days bore on, Isabella only grew more confused and angry as to why Lewis had spared her. Surely it wasn't because of her connection to her father. One day, Lewis was cooking dinner in his home for himself and Isabella, despite her refusal to eat anything he gave her, when he heard the shifting of someone moving. Turning around, he saw Isabella leaning against the wall for support, fuming in frustration. It might have been intimidating had she not required holding onto the wall in order to keep herself upright.
Why did you spare me?
She yelled out, unable to take the answer that Lewis had given her days ago. Lewis simply walked over and took Isabella's shoulder and sat her down on a nearby chair.
I told you to rest. You shouldn't exert yourself like this.
Isabella didn't care as she yelled out once more,
Answer me!
Lewis sighed and turned back to ladle the soup. Because you are a wolf, just as your father was. To kill you would be to sin. To kill you would to be like Horkos. They kill anyone who they please and call them sheep, no matter how bravely they fought or with honor. It's disrespectful. I served the Blackstone Legion. I served Apollyon, not this mockery of her ideals that Astria claims in order to further her own war and tyranny. I spared you because Apollyon would have spared you. And Astria is no Apollyon. Astria is a tyrant, pretending to wear Apollyon's face. The words stunned Isabella into silence, and when Lewis handed her a bowl of soup, for the first time, she reluctantly took it. It was clear that Lewis's words had gotten to her, and now she needed time to process them. While Isabella didn't know Apollyon, or what she stood for exactly, she was too young to understand during her time in the Blackstone Legion. She had never considered what would happen if Horkos had won. She would be out of a job, that was for certain, and if Horkos was to win, there would be no war for her to fight. Then what? What would she do? What would Horkos do? Would Horkos mock those they have killed just like the knights, samurai, Vikings, and Wu Lin did at the festival? If Horkos wins, Isabella realized, there would be peace. Tyrannical peace, but peace all the same. She didn't understand why, but the idea of peace scared her. As time went on, Lewis would continue to nurse Isabella back to health, and eventually word that a detachment of Horkos was making their way to the village had reached their ears, led by none other than Asmodeus. Isabella would take up her armor and longsword to join Lewis outside the town to confront them. As Asmodeus reached the village, she was the first to speak, looking towards Isabella's direction.
Isabella, it appeared you had failed. Coercing with the enemy too, no less? I'm disappointed. It would appear you are a sheep after all.
Asmodeus would give the signal to attack, but before their forces could, Isabella spoke up.
Trial by combat, Asmodeus. Now.
Isabella's voice stood stern, and without any room for arguing, the forces that followed Asmodeus stopped in their track, unsure of what to do now.
You believe you can kill me?
Asmodeus said mockingly as she stepped up.
You are a mockery of Apollyon's image. You and Horkos will bring an end to war through tyranny. So long as I draw breath, I will not allow such a grim existence come to be.
Asmodeus once again laughed at Isabella's words before drawing her longsword and approaching. The two warriors would stare at one another before charging without another word. As Isabella approached, she would slam her shoulder into Asmodeus's armor, and quickly following up by slamming the hilt of her longsword into Asmodeus's side. Asmodeus would respond by slashing at Isabella's shoulder with a clawed gauntlet, causing Isabella to scream out in pain before Asmodeus pierced Isabella's armor with her longsword.
Pathetic and weak.
Asmodeus's words rang out just as loud as the clashing of metal between the two. Isabella managed to parry Asmodeus' swing before retaliating with one of her own. Finally on the advantage, Isabella pressed her offense, overwhelming Asmodeus with strike after strike, thrust after thrust, slash after slash, bash after bash. Asmodeus couldn't keep up until Isabella eventually disarmed the warmonger and held her by the throat.
Mercy!
Asmodeus screamed, the words before she truly understood their meaning.
Mercy! You beg for mercy!
Isabella threw Asmodeus to the ground before turning to the detachment of Horkos that was accompanying her.
Your commander begs for mercy! What kind of weakness is that? We are warriors. We fight till our last breaths. To not do so would make us cowards. We fight for that is our purpose. I fight because with every step I take, war shall follow. I fight because it is my calling. And it is your calling too. To serve Horkos puts an end to war and conflict, and to establish a tyrannical rule. Fight with me, and we shall never fear the uncertainty of peace.
Isabella shouted before turning back to Asmodeus and pressing her into the dirt beneath them with her boot, before looking up at Lewis, who was approaching with his halberd ready. Isabella could feel Asmodeus give up struggling beneath her boot.
Do you know what kind of creature awaits its own slaughter?
Isabella spoke into Asmodeus' ear as Lewis raised his halberd.
Sheep.
The word was followed by the sound of metal meeting flesh as Asmodeus was executed, her head rolling off her shoulders. Silence fell upon the detachment of Horkos that had accompanied her before cheers and celebrations erupt. Months later, when Chimera was formed to oppose Horkos, they went to investigate the village that was attacked by Asmodeus to determine its fate. To their surprise, they found the village was protected by a new legion, one led by a warden whose armor was created out of that of a dead warmonger's, whose sword bared the image of the heads of the Cerberus, whose member called her by name Isabella, or by her title given to her by the members of the newly formed Wolfheart Legion, Bellicus.